Okay, I'd like to thank the organizers of this meeting. I'd like to thank the audience for coming. And I will start with a few sort of personal reminiscences about myself in the Congo and my contact with Lumumba. I came to the Congo in December of 1959. I was a research associate at the Center for International Studies at MIT, and my job basically was to study the independence struggle. I did that and eventually wrote a book about it called Political Protest in the Congo. In that context, at the time there were many political parties, dozens of them, because of course one of the problems that the Congolese independence struggle faced was that there was so little time. In West Africa, the independence struggles spent years with the result that they were able to unify themselves before the achievement of independence. That was not the case in the Congo. On the one hand, that was the victory of the independence struggle. They got immediate independence. It hardly lasted 2 years. On the other hand, there was a heavy price to be paid for that because the lack of unity, you saw some of it in the film, ended up costing plenty. I chose 3 political parties to study, and I was lucky in that choice, and one of them was the MNC Lumumba. And after Lumumba came back from the Roundtable Conference, I managed to get an interview with him. I can say he was extremely welcoming. He invited me to lunch. I had lunch with his family, and I explained my project, and immediately sat down at his desk and typed out a letter to all of his sections, that is to say, the political parties' local sections in different parts of the country, anywhere, saying they should cooperate with me to the fullest extent. And that was like a passport, because as I then traveled around the country and visited those sections, I was welcomed. I must say, at times I was sort of welcomed almost like an inspector general, which was not his intention. But people would start telling me things about, internal quarrels and so on. Of course, as a political scientist, I was delighted to have that access. Later on, I visited Stanleyville, now Kisangani, which was, of course, the center of his power. Well, I tried to get a long interview with him, and he told me very flatly, look, we're in the middle of an electoral campaign. I have no time for history, but I'll tell you what, I'll attach you to one of my propaganda teams, and you can travel with them and see how we operate. And indeed, that's what I did, and went quite far north for about, I think, close to a week, sort of attached to one of his propaganda teams. And again, of course, that was very valuable. Eventually, I actually did not focus on his political party in writing a case study of one of the political parties. And the reason for that was simply that time and circumstances didn't permit me to delve into the documentation that party of course, had internally. And one of the other parties, the parties led by his deputy prime minister, Antoine Gizengo, who's still alive today, they gave me complete access. So I wrote about that. Later on, I was present at the assembly meeting where sovereignty was transferred, and where he made his unscheduled, very dynamic speech, which was later denounced by many foreign, Western, and Congolese leaders as having been undiplomatic, inappropriate, insulting to the king, who was sitting next to him. I didn't find all of that to be the case, actually. But that was more or less the last time I actually met him. I knew some of the people in his entourage quite well, and of course I followed his history. I found him interesting, charismatic, very, very dynamic. I liked him. He certainly had a very authoritarian quality to him, which a lot of his colleagues, even in his own party, resented. Now that's not really what I want to talk about. I'm a historian now. See, when you're a political scientist in 1960, by 1914, you end up being a historian. Because you look back and that's what historians do. I would like to focus on several points. And the first one is, why did the United States, even before he made that speech, consider him unacceptable, almost an enemy? The documents that have now been revealed, some 60 years after they were first written, show that the United States was already bribing people to be against him during the May 1960 elections. In other words, long before he'd shown his colors in international relations. The question is why? And I think the answer to that has to be twofold. One, at that time the United States had no Africanists of any serious quality in the State Department or in the CIA, and knew almost nothing. There was no Bureau of African Affairs in the State Department. It was all run through the Bureau of European Affairs. And information essentially came through European embassies, where there was some guy responsible to contact the Belgians, the British, the French, whatever, and find out what's happening in their colonies. Well, obviously, under those circumstances, the kind of information that was received by the U.S. government was very prejudicial against Lumumba. I don't have time here to explain why the Belgians were so hot under the collar against him, but they were. And I think it's fair to say that the American officials just sort of inherited their attitudes. That was not unusual at the time. The second reason, I think, was this, that Lumumba did have some contacts, very few contacts, with Pan-African circles. We had been to Nigeria, we had been to Ghana, we had met Nkrumah and Nasser and those people. And he had, and then he sort of modeled himself somewhat after some of these people. And that meant a sort of neutralist bent in terms of international affairs, in terms of the Cold War. And the Dulles brothers, who basically ran U.S. foreign policy at the time, simply would not tolerate, if they could prevent it, neutrality. They had a kind of an attitude in international relations, you're either with us or you're against us. And neutrality, which you had to put up with, in the case of India, for instance, there was no way of getting around that. But neutrality in Africa, that was not going to be easily tolerated. In some places, of course, they had to. Sekou Touré in Guinea, Nkrumah in what was then the Gold Coast, but still, there was strong opposition. So that I think, was the attitudinal position of the U.S. government. Now, when Lumumba became prime minister, as you saw in the film, one of the first things that happened after the mutiny was that the Belgians did send their troops into the Congo. Lumumba's first reaction to this, and it's too bad the film didn't say this, because in my opinion that it's in the public record and it is so important. Lumumba's first reaction was to send an official government-to-government request to the United States government asking for the expedition of 3,000 American troops to the Congo. That was done on July 12, 1960, 12 days after independence. 8 days after the mutiny. What did the United States do? They said, no, forget about it. Or I guess I should say we said. And they said, why don't you appeal to the United Nations? That's how the appeal to the United Nations came about. But can you think of any communist dupe or agent who has asked for American troops to come to his country? So the charge that he was somehow in cahoots with the communists at that early stage is, to my mind, totally absurd. But he went further. You know, he made a trip to New York and Washington. In New York, he met Hammarskjöld, the Secretary General of the United Nations. Unfortunately, they ended up having a very bad relationship. Came to Washington, was put up in Blair House. Just before he came to the United States, he welcomed a guy who had arrived in the Congo with he was a very smooth character, claimed he was a financier from Washington, from Wall Street. And Lumumba signed, or rather initialed, a 4-page contract with this gentleman whose name was Detweiler, in which he gave Detweiler the right to manage all of Congo's mineral resources for 50 years. And he invited Detweiler to come on his plane to come with him to New York. In other words, he was courting us. Now, it must be said that that contract was a terrible contract. And had it been put into effect, you know, he would have, in effect, sold the Congo's wealth down the river. But the contract had to be confirmed by Parliament. And of course, at that time, he had a majority in Parliament. So, I mean, he had a back door out. It seems to me it was a device, again, as the appeal for the 3,000 troops, to get the United States to support him. Interestingly enough, this 900-page book that the State Department has just published contains neither the document asking for 3,000 troops, nor the document of that contract. In other words, even today, there is a kind of putting aside, putting under the carpet, the fact that Lumumba wanted the help of the United States and was willing to stick his neck out to get it. Now, after fast forward, you've seen a lot about the Katanga secession and so on. Let it be said, the United States never supported Katanga secession. And that was a big division within NATO, within its allies, because there were people, France, some circles in Belgium that supported Katanga secession. The United States didn't do that. Um, what was his problem with the UN? Well, the problem with the UN was that Lumumba thought, here the UN is sending an army. There were at one point something like 20,000 UN troops in the Congo, starting in the summer of 1960. And Lumumba felt, one, I'm the prime minister, they are here to help the sovereignty, maintain the sovereignty of the Congo, I can order them. That was a mistake. He was not in a position to order them. And secondly, he wanted those troops to attack Katanga. You saw some of that in the film. That was before he sent his own troops there. Hammarskjöld, the Secretary General of the UN, said, no, 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 the UN is not here to make war. And I am, and he was, of course, one of the great Secretary Generals of the United Nations, I will reunify the Congo through diplomatic means. It is one of the great ironies that both these men died, in effect, seeking to achieve that goal, the reunification of the Congo. They died very close to each other in 1961. Hammarskjöld was on his way once again to meet Katangan officials in northern Rhodesia at the time, today Zambia, in order to achieve that goal. And his plane crashed. We all think that that was done in one or another way on purpose. There were certainly many, many circles in the world, and especially in white-dominated Southern Africa at the time, who were dead set against Hammarskjöld and the United Nations in the Congo. But the irony is that Hammarskjöld could have saved Lumumba, but they broke over the issue, is it going to be through diplomacy or is it going to be through war that Katanga will be reunited with the rest of the Congo? Well, this young man with almost no international experience understood the circumstances of his country better than that sophisticated international civil servant, because the diplomatic efforts, even after they got rid of Lumumba, to reunify the Congo failed. And the successor to Hammarskjöld used on two occasions, the second one successful, military force to end Katanga secession. Just fast forward. It was not only Lumumba, of course, who was eliminated from power, but Lumumbists were eliminated from power with Mobutu's coup in September of 1960. What did these Lumumbists do? Well, some of them compromised and made their peace with the new sort of Western-oriented government that Mobutu in effect led. He wasn't president yet, but he led it, and he was head of the army. Others went into exile, and some returned to start a revolution. And those that started in the fall of 1963, and that became the largest post-independence African revolutionary movement, and probably is still, if not the largest, one of the largest. They captured half the country, and had it not been for massive foreign intervention, would have in effect overthrown the government in Kinshasa. But once again, the United States became immensely active, both monetarily and indeed militarily. We, for instance, the CIA created an air force for the government that acted against the rebels. And then there was the recruitment of many, many mercenaries. And the rebellion was in the end defeated. Now, the leaders of this rebellion did have communist Eastern connections. I mean, they saw themselves, of course, as having been completely betrayed by the West. So in the context of the Cold War, they turned to the East. So, you know, for instance, Mundela, who was one of the key leaders of that rebellion, had been in China, had apparently learned guerrilla tactics there. He certainly followed Maoist principles in organizing his rebellion. Ultimately, many years later, he escaped to what was then communist-controlled Brazzaville, but they sold him to Mobutu, and he was then tortured to death by Mobutu's army. It cost the United States a fair amount of money to defeat this rebellion. It cost the Congolese probably close to 1 million people, this unsuccessful revolution. If it had not been for the exclusion of the Lumumbists from government power, which, mind you, was a government of national union, his worst political enemies were ministers in that government, would that rebellion have occurred? I'm not the only one to think no. In other words, we created a communist-leaning second phase Lumumba, which in turn created a major revolution, which in turn we spent a lot of effort putting down, and which ultimately then led to the 30 years of Mobutu dictatorship. It is a true tragedy. It was unnecessary. Nobody likes my story. I will end with this. Nobody likes my story. Because what does it say? On the right, it says you were fools. On the left, it says Lumumba could have been bought. Of course, he couldn't have been bought, but he could have become, like Nkrumah was, somebody with whom we had positive diplomatic relations despite some differences about the Cold War. I'll now pass this on to my friend Gilbert. Let me just end with one thing I forgot to say. And you will not forget it. Right? There's a brand new book, the first full-length biography of Lumumba. It's not a critical study in the sense that, it's a complementary study, but it's written by the most senior Congolese political scientist in the United States, George Nzongola, and I highly recommend it, published by Ohio University Press. It's called Patrice Lumumba.
Welcome, Mike, Gilbert. For those of you on social media, you can follow us at Congo Friends or Congo Crisis, or tweet at us during the discussion tonight. Now we're going to pass it on to Gilbert Mundela, and he's going to bring us up to date what's transpiring in Congo today within the context of what happened to Lumumba in the early 60s.
What do you tell people about a leader that has been so big, but that has not been taught in your history book? What do you tell people about Lumumba that is going to make sense when you are trying to figure out what he was exactly because of the confusion that they have created around this man? I recall when Lumumba was killed, I was about 6, 7 years old, and it was a frantic thing because The massacre that took place in Kasai, where I'm from, was labeled as Lumumba action. But later on, we came to realize that it was not Lumumba, it was Mobutu. And still today, some of the people in Kasai are still holding a grudge against Lumumba, that he was the one who massacred the people, who gave the order to massacre people in the church in Kasai. But you know, as we went to school, reading a little bit about Lumumba was a crime. Having even a picture of Lumumba was a crime. Mobutu made us believe that he was a hero, but whenever you try to use Lumumba's name or whatever thought he had, you become suspicious. You are the one that the service security were going to follow. I recall at university, we had one of the book, Patrice Lumumba, and some of his speeches that we were circulating among students. And one of our friends, because we tease each other, from tribe to tribe, we say, you are from the trees, you are from the eating cassava trees, and so on. And in that, we made the kind of connection among ourselves as students. And one of our guys was among the students who were in the service. He came to tell us, you guys, you better be careful, because this book is going to create problems for you. And from that day, we couldn't even talk about Lumumba anymore. It was something that we had to watch carefully when we were going on. Things that I retained from Lumumba are this. The struggle of Lumumba, Professor Weiss was questioning what was going on and why this happened. In my view, I think Lumumba questioned something that was fundamental. Because Belgium came and said that we are going to give civilization and Christianity. And Christianity is based on love for each other and equality. And Lumumba asked this question, how can you be telling me that you love God and you're a Christian when you are doing this to us? This was the first thing that Lumumba was questioning, because Lumumba was raised as a Christian. And he started questioning all these issues and raising these issues with the Belgian. And then when you start asking a Belgian who was really the master, who was the person that you could not even watch, you can even look at the face when you're talking, it became an issue. And remember, in that period, it was colonial time, as well as South Africa, as well as Rhodesia, as well as Angola. It was a context that was not appropriate for Lumumba to start questioning this issue. The MLC, one of the things that we find, was even created by Malula. It was Mouvement National Chrétien, Catholique. Then they call on Lumumba, because he was a charismatic person, and it's Ileo and the other that brought him there to be part of the movement. So that brought Lumumba to preeminence in Kinshasa and so on, and became the vocal person for the Congo. Lumumba was asking for equality. Lumumba was asking for dignity, which is the same fight that African Americans had here in America. The other thing that Lumumba was seeking for is, look, God gave us this land, this continent that is called Africa. It's ours. We should benefit from it. We should develop. We should govern it and try to do something for our people, because it's where God put us, and this is where we're going to grow for. These are two things I keep coming from my reading of Lumumba, in the sense that he didn't come to question why the white man was taking all the riches of Africa. He wanted us Africans to be master of our destiny, to be able to enter into interaction with all the others. As you can see in the movie, the professor mentioned it, that Lumumba passage to the United Nations as well as to Washington was not mentioned. That is one of the flaws that I see also in the movie. But this movie even itself has not been seen in the Congolese circles back home for people to have an idea about what was Lumumba, what was the struggle of Lumumba, and how Lumumba was killed, what the Belgians did for him to be killed. 3 years ago, Lumumba's family filed a lawsuit against the Belgians. To this day, nothing has been done. As you can see, in the quest for truth to come out, the story of Lumumba is still being a story that is not going to rest and put people at ease. You can see that the same thing is happening in the Congo today. Same thing is happening in the Congo. During the colonial time, we were abused. Today, we are against abuse because of the mineral, because of the riches of the Congo. And when Congolese want to speak out, we are always silent. We are not given a voice, we are not given a chance to speak out about the issue we have in the Congo. When we try to speak of them, they say, oh, you don't like other Africans, you don't like other this, you want to be against everybody. That's not the case. Congolese are peace-loving people. When Mobutu left power, it was the struggle that the Congolese have launched to make sure that Mobutu get away. But Mobutu was the man that the CIA put there and maintained in every instance that was coming out. Mobutu was helped to stay in power. When the democratic fight started and we tried to get peacefully Mobutu removed from the Congo, we had a national conference, which was the first gathering of Congolese of all walk of life to speak out about the problems of the Congo. That national conference gave us a framework to move out of the struggle we had. It seemed like it threatened some of the interest in Europe as well as in America. They crushed it, Mobutu remained in power. They helped Mobutu stay in power. At the end of the day, Mobutu was sick. They realized that nothing is going to happen. Instead of talking with the democratic forces in the Congo, they went on board as someone from nowhere who had kidnapped American citizen, Laurent Désiré Kabila. They brought him as the leader who was going to liberate Congo. Liberate Congo from what? When we had already done everything to get Mobutu, to weaken Mobutu, to make him weak so we could get rid of him and start from scratch and build the country. They got us in another turmoil with the so-called Banyamulenge. We don't know where they come from. The Banyamulenge are a tribe that we never identify in the Congo. They are people from Rwandese descent who came into Congo during the colonial time, lived in the Mulenge mountains, but now they became a tribe of Congo, which they are not. But it was also to show you the way the Belgians did it when they came to take power against Lumumba. When they claimed that the women were raped and so on. Of course, there was some rape. I'm not going to say that they didn't have any rapes. There was some rape. But the Belgian intervention made it possible for Kasavubu to do and Mobutu to do what they did. So the same thing, they brought us the Banyamulenge with the FDL to really derail again Congo. And today we are in a turmoil that we don't know which way we're going. Women have been raped at the rate of 40 minutes, one woman raped every 48 minutes in the Congo. I keep on wondering why in this world, in America, there have not been any uproar to say this has to stop. No one in America, from the president to all the first ladies, no one has stood up and said, you cannot do this. They're protecting those who are raping Congolese women. They're protecting those who are killing Congolese women. They are protecting those who are killing Congolese. 8 or 12 million people have died in the Congo. No one is talking about it. No one is talking about it. All the gadgets you are using here are coming from what? From the blood of Congolese. Just like when you had the car, the rubber, our people's hands were cut for you to have car in this country. Why are we sitting idle and letting the Congolese being killed because they tried to follow the dream of Lumumba? Let's have our resources and manage them and share them with the world. Why is that? Why is this silence? Why is this silence for the plight of Congolese women, Congolese children? Congo has given the world so much, so much. Without Congo, the First World War wouldn't have been won. Without Congo, Second World War II wouldn't have been won. Today, the technology you have in going to the moon is because of the cobalt of Congo. Without that, you wouldn't be in the moon, you wouldn't be anywhere. You need to know that. You need to come and say, we need to stop this. So when you see Africa going cozy with China, it's not that Chinese are the best. It's because you are not coming out with solutions that will help Africa. You are not coming out with a solution that will help Africa. Africans are willing to say, hey, I'm American. How many Africans have you seen claiming, hey, I'm Chinese? We have more in common, but you are not trying to reach out and say, we can change and make things better. You are just making things worse. Lumumba came to America to ask for help. Africa has come to America to ask for help. What did America do to help Africa? We had the summit here. Everybody says it was a good summit. How much has been going to Africa compared to what China has been doing into Africa? These are real questions we have to ask ourselves. Are we really seeking to help Africa, or we're just seeking to dominate Africa and try to just take the resources at a cheap price? These are the questions. And when you raise those questions, you become an enemy. No, it's a matter of asking, what am I getting out of the deal I'm doing with you? If a Chinese come and tell me, from your shoes, I'm going to give you $500, and an American come and say, I'm going to give you $10, let's be realistic. Where will you go? Where will you go? So now, Africa is trying to build infrastructure. No one is trying to help us. You come here, they are not interested in doing this business. So when Gaddafi stood up and said, we're going to do a bank for Africa instead of the World Bank, we're going to do the telecommunication. You know how much money is going into telecommunication when Africa has to go through the European channel? It's about $1 billion a year that is costing Africa just going through Europe for telecommunication. If I have to call Niamey from Kinshasa, I have to call Paris, Paris then transfer me to Niamey. That's what happened. It costs more to fly from Kinshasa, from Brussels to Kinshasa than it costs from flying from Brussels to, from Paris to New York. It's the same distance. All I'm asking, and all the legacy that I retain from Lumumba, is that Africans want to be in charge of Africa and deal with the world on equal terms. And this is why we're hoping that you'll understand the message that Lumumba gave. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to quickly go to question and answer. So raise your hand and pose a question to the panelists right here.
Good presentation. My name is Elvis from Colombia, South America, but I'm fascinated by Patrice Lumumba because I believe in pan-Americanism. Embracement. Definitely, I think the Lumumba was ahead of his time. It showed But I have a question. Do you think that Kagame from Rwanda has something to do with what is going on in Congo right now?
The reason why I smile when you say Colombia is that I know that there is a large portion of Congolese descendant in your country. So you're one of them. Thank you. Yes, Kagame and Museveni have a major role in what is taking place in the Congo. They are the key architect of the disaster that is taking place in the Congo. We have our own theory in regard to some of these issues. In, the quest for Balkanization is one of the problem that we have, and also the stealing of resources of the Congo has been one of the other issue, and also the fact that when Congo is unstable, there is no way you can have a strong force, a strong presence in Central Africa that can control the whole region. Just like Mobutu, when Mobutu was there, he was controlling the whole Central Africa region. He was making kings, he was making governors and so on. He was the man in charge. Right now, Congo is just in shambles. And it's a thing that Kagame, Museveni are doing because they wanted part of the Congo to be just trading with them. There is an East African major trade bloc that is trying to be created that will include the eastern part of Congo. And this part of this is to make sure that all the resources that are coming from the east transit by the east, by Rwanda as well as Uganda. It's not only that. Even today, that in the configuration we have, every single country that is involved in the crisis is gaining from the fact that they are in the Congo. Today, when you go to Katanga, about 6,000 trucks come to lorry the copper. Only 200 are Congolese, and the 200 belong to whom? To the governor of Katanga. The rest is only foreigner. Congolese are not benefiting from what they have. They are not.
Honestly, I'd rather stick with the history. But of course, it is true that the Congo has been and is a very weak state and a very rich one. And all the neighbors who are stronger, who have more stable governments, doesn't mean that they're democratic governments. They've got their act together. Are using their power in order to benefit. So today, in fact, I would say, contrary to 50 years ago, the pressures on the country from the neighbors are more significant than the pressures on the country from the international, the far away, the West, et cetera, et cetera. And so it is absolutely true that Angola, South Africa, Rwanda, Uganda, especially those, have had an enormous amount of influence in the Congo in recent years, and have benefited from that influence, some of which has been military. So, absolutely.
Yes.
On the conflict minerals issue, isn't there the U.S. has some trade regulations now that they are supposed to disclose the source of the conflict minerals. There's been some effort on that. And I agree there's not enough on the women's issue. A couple years ago there was a play at the United States called Ruin, where they used the play as a way to highlight the issues around abuse of women and so forth to destabilize society. But aren't there these trade regulations that
the trade regulation somehow addressed the issue, but when you have already a structure organized in Rwanda that is taking all these minerals, and you have false statistics saying that Rwanda produced this and that and so on, and backed by international community, the trade regulation will not do anything. It will just be making people feel like they are clean, but they are not, you know. And to that thing, I was saying that the issue of Kagame started when he came here to tell the US government that he was going to attack Congo. Kagame attacked Congo. Kagame army and Museveni army fought in Kisangani. They fought, those two armies fought in Kisangani.
Each other.
Each other. They fought each other. They fought each other. So to show you that the world has been just silent to the crimes that are taking place in the Congo. Enough is enough. We need to stand up and stop that.
I'd like to respond to your question about, you're basically speaking about Dodd-Frank, right?
That's right.
And the Kimberley.
The Dodd-Frank is, of course, a law that was passed. It's now under great attack by the Republican